Welcome back to Inside Politics. Our guest today, Dr. John Weil from MTSU, political science professor there. We're talking about the second week of hearings held by the Select Committee of the House, looking into the January 6th takeover at the U.S. Capitol. Dr. Weil, the committee's goal has clearly been to talk to the people at the Justice Department. They may be having some inroads. The Justice Department's now asking for those files that they have. The committee says you can look at them, but they're not going to give them to you. There's going to be a little battle about this now. It looks like they made some pretty good cases, particularly against some of the people that were in the committee, that were major parts of the committee on Thursday, I should say.
Yeah, the great sort of mystery in this whole process has been Merrick Garland, who the Attorney General, who will ultimately be the one probably who will decide whether prosecutions go forward. And he's played it very close to the vest, almost to the point where he appeared initially sort of disinterested. So that may, he may be as important an audience as a general public in terms of the overall outcome of this.
Well, the department has had some sort of different ideas about this. First, they indicted 2 of Trump's aides that Congress wanted to be held in contempt for not dealing with them or coming and giving them information or testifying. But on 2 others, they decided not to indict on that. Very mixed signals. Do you think the Justice Department is going to take even a second look at those they have not indicted, and given what they're doing now looking at these records?
Well, they may, and there is a degree to which some individuals can assert executive privilege in a way that others cannot, and it may simply indicate that they're trying to make a case-by-case reasonable determination. Interestingly, Steve Bannon, now this doesn't come out of the Justice Department as such, I believe, but the courts have insisted that he is going to appear and he is going to turn over some testimony. And
the 2 aides that were not indicted did do some cooperation, and they sort of reneged on some of that. They may have played some role in that as well.
Right.
Another question that has puzzled me: during multiple investigations of former President Trump over the years, during his 2 impeachment trials, it was said repeatedly that under a Justice Department policy, no sitting president could be indicted. A lot of things we've been talking about in these hearings happened while President Trump was still president. Can he be indicted now as a former president for what he did as president?
I believe so. To be honest, I have never completely bought into the justification that a sitting president cannot be indicted. I do sort of understand the rationale that it'd be awfully hard for a president to continue his duties if he were under that. But, I think if that's true, then unless we want to go with the king can do no wrong, the British precedent, if he wasn't accountable then, he or any other president needs to be accountable later.
Now, former President Trump this week issued a 12-page statement asserting that the panel is illegitimate and the presentations are all one-sided. But he also repeated a lot of the false information about the election being stolen and rigged and all those sorts of things. Is this going to be effective enough for the president to keep a hold of his iron grip on the MAGA land, on the MAGA nation?
It reminded me, I read it very closely, and it reminded me of the old saying that, if you're in a hole and can't get out, it doesn't do a whole lot of good to keep on digging. And that's what it looked to me like. He's totally unrepentant, unwavering that, he won the election.
Dr. Weil, there are still polls out there that show a majority of Republicans believe that President Trump was right, that the election was stolen. If that's true, the testimony that we're seeing more from Republicans about this, making charges about the president knowing that what he was saying was wrong, wasn't true, but he continued to say it, is that going to make the MAGA people and other Republicans think twice about what they think about this particular things that happened in and around January 6th?
It probably can, it'll probably have some at least take a second look. Interestingly, there have been approximately 60 court cases on this issue, and all but one went against Trump, and the one that was for him dealt with a technicality rather than an actual finding of some kind of illegality. So, but, who reads court decisions, particularly lower court decisions? So this certainly has a wider audience, but it reminds me of the saying that we're all entitled to our own opinion, but we're not necessarily but we're not entitled to our own facts.
The committee's also presented evidence that the big lie was also the big ripoff that the president, with his false claims, raised over $250 million to fight election fraud, yet none of the money went for that purpose. Does he have some explaining to do to the MAGA land, or is MAGA land paying any attention to it?
You know, it's sort of sad, isn't it, that if somebody's being ripped off, it's actually it's not Nancy Pelosi, it's not Hillary Clinton, it's Trump supporters. You know, there's an adage, well, a couple of adages. One is, you know, milk is the mother's milk of politics, or I'm sorry, money is the mother's milk of politics, but the other is follow the money. And, you know, we sometimes forget that in the Watergate hearings, part of the initial hearings had to do exactly with this thing. You know, where was the money? You know, money was being filtered through committee to reelect the president rather than the Republican National Committee, and it was less accountable. And we seem to have something similar here.
Donald Trump remains a very powerful figure in the Republican Party despite these hearings the last 2 weeks. Just this week, a Republican congressman in South Carolina who voted in favor of his impeachment was defeated in the primary. There are other Republican candidates who have won primaries across the country who support him in the big lie. Can anything be done to convince people to change their mind about this? I mean, let's continue to have these. I keep asking the same question again. What's going to make people dislike Donald Trump or change their mind about Donald Trump other than people who already didn't like him in the first place?
It's hard to say. One thing to note is that many of these wins right now are wins within the wins for Republican Party nominations. That does not necessarily mean that they're going to win the general election. And in some cases, people who are supporting the more extreme views of, you know, election irregularity, in my judgment, are going to have a really tough time when it comes to the general election.
Dr. John Viles, our guest. He's a political science professor at Middle Tennessee State University, Dean of the Honors College there. We're talking about the second week of hearings by the Select Committee at the House, looking into the January 6th takeover of the U.S. Capitol. Our conversation continues on the other side of this break. Stay with us.